If you ask most people what the big Rick and Morty scandal was, they'll say the McDonald's sauce thing. The one where grown adults queued outside fast food restaurants in the rain and the police had to come. And that's fair enough, because it was extremely funny and it was on every news site for about a week. It's also, comfortably, the least serious thing on this list, which is sort of the odd shape of tonight's video. Rick and Morty has never had an episode banned. There have been lawsuits involving key figures, letters from regulators, and some advertisers walking away. Not one episode has been permanently pulled anywhere. Nearly every fight this show has ever had happened somewhere off the screen, in the writer's room, in a courthouse nobody was watching, in a car park in Florida, on a subreddit at 2 a.m. So that's what we're doing. Roughly in order, but each bit stands on its own, so if you drift off halfway through, you haven't missed a payoff. There isn't one. If you like this sort of thing, subscribing genuinely helps. That's the whole pitch. Let's get into it. To understand why nobody at Adult Swim was ever particularly shocked by anything Rick and Morty did, you have to know where the thing was born, and it wasn't in a network development meeting. It was born at Channel 101, which is a monthly short film festival in Los Angeles, co-founded by Dan Harmon and his writing partner Rob Schrab. The setup is simple and a bit brutal. Filmmakers make short pilots, an audience watches them all in one sitting, and then the audience votes. The top 5 come back next month. Everything else dies. No notes, no executives, no development process. Just a room full of people deciding in real time whether your thing was any good. Justin Roiland was one of the people making shorts for it, and in 2006 he made one called The Real Animated Adventures of Doc and Marty, which was a parody of Back to the Future, and which I am not going to describe to you in any detail because it genuinely does not need describing. It's crude in a way that feels almost aggressive, like it was designed as a dare. The characters in it are the direct ancestors of Rick and Morty. Same dynamic, same shape, same voice, more or less. I find that genuinely interesting, and not in a gotcha way. 2 of the most beloved characters in modern animation started life as a joke about how far you could push an audience before they walked out. Everyone involved has always been completely upfront about that. Roiland never pretended otherwise. Harmon never pretended otherwise. It's just the origin story. Harmon, at that point, was on his way to becoming a much bigger deal. Community would arrive on NBC in 2009 and turn him into one of the most talked about showrunners in television, for reasons both good and complicated, which we'll get to. But Channel 101 is where the 2 of them met, and it's where the sensibility got set. When Adult Swim came calling, the pitch essentially was, take that energy, put a family around it, and give it a budget. The pilot went out on the 2nd of December 2013. Here's a fun detail that I love, and that always feels slightly illegal. The Rick and Morty theme, that jangly, slightly cheap-sounding synth line everyone can hum, is lifted from the opening of a completely different Roiland Channel 101 short. It was already sitting there. He just brought it along. And knowing all of that doesn't excuse a single thing that comes later in this video. It doesn't. But it does explain why, when the show did something appalling in season 5 and the internet lost its mind, absolutely nobody at the network appeared surprised. The show had been telling everyone what it was since 2006. Some people just weren't listening. But before any of the on-screen stuff got anybody's attention, the first real fight on this show wasn't about jokes at all. It was about money. This is the oldest scandal on the list and almost nobody talks about it, which I think is mostly because there's no video of it. Nobody filmed a crowd. It's a labour dispute in an office building in Burbank, and those don't trend. Here's what happened. In the summer of 2014, the American artists working on Rick and Morty, the ones based out of the Starburns Industries building, got in touch with the Animation Guild, which is Ayatisa Local 839. The complaints were the boring, extremely real kind. Wages, no health benefits, no pension. The show was a hit. The network was owned by an enormous corporation, and the people drawing it had no retirement plan. The Guild ran an organising drive over the summer and filed a petition with the National Labour Relations Board in the middle of August. And then the whole thing fell over on a technicality, in a way that's almost funny if it isn't your health insurance. The Guild had organised against Starburns Industries, which had produced the first season, but somewhere between season 1 and season 2, the crew had actually been shifted onto the books of a different entity, a company called Rick and Morty, LLC, different employer, which meant the petition named the wrong company and was therefore worthless. Nobody had told the union. Arguably, nobody had told the crew in a way they'd registered. So the Guild had two options: start again from scratch with new representation cards and a new filing and hope there was time, or go to the crew, explain the mess and ask them what they wanted to do. They went with the second one. There was a long meeting on the evening of Thursday, the 4th of September, 2014, with most of the artistic staff in the room. They talked through the situation. One of the things on the table was striking, actually walking off the show mid-production to force a contract. Almost everyone in that room voted to walk out the following Monday. They did have to. Once management understood the crew were serious, things moved very quickly. A contract was negotiated. The crew ratified it. Hourly wage increases, health coverage, pension. Over 24 American artists covered by the agreement. The Guild's organiser, Stephen Kaplan, called it an incredible victory and made a point of saying the crew had driven it themselves. They'd worked out they had leverage and they'd used it at exactly the right moment. The Guild's business rep, Steve Hewlett, said the talks got intense but stayed professional, and that it was as focused a crew as he'd dealt with. Genuinely a nice story, that. Small group of people correctly identified their moment, got paid. And then Justin Roiland went on Reddit. He posted in the Rick and Morty subreddit, and he was not delighted. He described the union's behaviour as unprofessional and not needed. He never said they came off as desperate and indecent. He made a point of saying he loved his crew, wanted them happy, was in awe of their talent and dedication, and then wrote, in capitals, "Fuck the union." His argument was that the union had gone after the old studio, that the new studio genuinely had no idea any of this was happening, that by the time they found out the Guild was already pushing the crew towards a walkout, and that there'd been almost no time to put a deal together. He said it was incredibly stressful. He also made the point that this wasn't some faceless monster of a production. It was run by the two creators and a line producer. The thread got deleted the following day. Cartoon Brew had already screenshotted the lot. The Guild's answer to that is the part I find most persuasive, actually. Their position was, this was never a scrappy independent company being bullied by a big, mean union. Rick and Morty LLC was largely beside the point. The people who owned the property and paid the bills were Time Warner, and the story was a very large international conglomerate paying a skilled artistic staff below the going rate on wages, health and pension. And they pointed at the timeline as evidence. The Guild's rep couldn't get his calls returned until after the Labour Board petition landed, and the company didn't get serious about lawyers and contracts until it found out a strike vote had happened, which is a fairly hard argument to wriggle out of. Now, jumping forward, because this thread doesn't end there. In February of 2022, the production workers on Rick and Morty and on Solar Opposites, production managers, production supervisors, design assistants, casting assistants, storyboard coordinators, office coordinators asked to be recognised voluntarily. A supermajority of them. Attorneys for both productions came back and said the parent studios Adult Swim and 20th Television Animation weren't willing to voluntarily recognise the unit as proposed. So on the 22nd of February, they filed a petition for an election with the Labour Board instead. Within about a day, people on Reddit had dug up the 2014 posts and were passing them around again, which, if you've ever posted anything on the internet, is a useful thing to sit with. Now let's talk a bit about the writer's room. because that's where the next one starts. For the first season, the Rick and Morty writers' room was Harmon, Roiland, Tom Kaufman, Ryan Ridley, Wade Randolph, and Erica Costa, with Mike McMahon as writer's assistant. If you've spotted the pattern there, yes, all men. For season 3, they hired 4 women: Jane Becker, Sarah Carbiner, Jessica Gao, and Erica Rosby. Take the 2 creators out of the count, and the room was roughly 50-50. Season 3 went out in 2017, and it is, by most people's reckoning, including mine, the best run the show ever had. It's the one with the Citadel episode. It's the one with Evil Morty getting elected. It's the one everybody points at when they want to argue the show used to be better. And after the 2nd and 3rd episodes aired, Rick Mansing the Stone, credited to Jane Becker, and Pickle Rick, credited to Jessica Gao, both of those writers were harassed on Twitter and doxed. As in, people found their personal details and put them online, which is the specific move you make when you want somebody to be frightened in their own home. Somebody put together a Reddit thread documenting the whole thing. Harmon spoke to Entertainment Weekly about it that September, and he did not do the diplomatic version. He said he was on a Twitter sabbatical, so the last thing he'd seen was the Reddit thread laying it out and the actual tweets people had sent. He said he'd gone into season 3 already expecting it, because he'd talked to Felicia Day about what happens to high-profile women online. They get doxed, harassed, threatened, slandered. He described part of it as a testosterone-based subculture, congratulating itself for trolling women. He said he thought the whole thing was disgusting, and separately, that he loathed these people, and that it sucked. The bit of his answer I think is actually the most useful, though, is the technical bit. Because he pointed out that these people had fundamentally misunderstood how television gets written. His version, everyone in that room writes the show together. The reason one name ends up on an episode is that a name has to go on it, and everybody deserves their turn at bat, where they do the outlining and the grunt work, and sometimes follow it through into post. It's a rotation. It reflects who did the paperwork, not who invented the jokes. He said he wanted to scream at his computer, "You idiots, we all write the show together." And he added that if you could genuinely tell one writer from another on a show he was running, then he'd gotten lazy, because the whole point of the process is that it all gets blended and refined until it's one voice. So the people insisting the episodes with women's names on them were the bad ones had, in a very real sense, picked their targets by reading a credit that doesn't mean what they thought it meant. The other thing Harmon said, which I keep coming back to, is basically a shrug of resignation. If you're lucky enough to make something really good that lots of people love, then some bad people are going to love it too. You can't insist that everyone watching your show has their head on straight. It's not a satisfying answer. It might be the only true one. And there's an irony sitting in the middle of this that's almost too neat. The episode Jessica Gao got harassed over was Pickle Rick. That's the one where Rick turns himself into a pickle to avoid family therapy and then murders his way through a sewer full of rats, using improvised tools made from insect parts. It's the most quoted, most memed, most merchandised episode the show has ever produced. The people who built an entire personality around that episode went after the woman who wrote it. What happened next to those 4 writers is the part that makes me happiest. That room turned out to be one of the most raided writers' rooms in Hollywood. Jessica Gao went on to write for Marvel and create She-Hulk. Sarah Carbiner and Erica Rosby created The Vindicators, which became its own little spin-off franchise with comics and a mini-series. Mike McMahon went off and made Star Trek Lower Decks. Everybody involved did completely fine. And that same fandom energy is about to show up in a very different place, which is a McDonald's car park. Right, this one. In 1998, McDonald's released a limited edition dipping sauce to promote Disney's Mulan. It was called Szechuan sauce. The promotion ended, the sauce went away, and for nearly 20 years, it existed only as a footnote in the condiment history, of a fast food company. Nobody thought about it. There was no reason to. Then on the 1st of April 2017, Adult Swim dropped the season 3 premiere with no warning as part of their annual April Fool's stunt, which is a lovely bit of chaos in itself. The episode is the Rick Redemption. And near the end of it, Rick explains to Morty what actually drives him. Not avenging his dead family, finding that McNugget sauce. He says it's his series arc, and that if it takes 9 seasons, he wants his McNugget dipping sauce. It's a joke about how hollow the idea of a character motivation is. That's the gag. Rick is telling you that the engine of the show is meaningless. McDonald's corporate chef Mike Harricks tweeted that same month that he'd see what he could do. A fan petition went up and gathered somewhere around 38,700 signatures. In July, McDonald's sent an actual jug of the stuff to Roiland and the writer's room, and he posted a photo of it, and everybody was having a lovely time. Then on the 1st of October, McDonald's announced the real thing. One day only, Saturday the 7th of October, at select restaurants as part of the promotion for their new buttermilk crispy tenders. They also had 1,000 screen-printed posters to give away. And on the 7th of October, it all came apart. Stores got tiny amounts. Some locations received around 20 packets. Some restaurants that were listed online as participating had none at all. Some sold out before the official start time, which is its own special kind of insult when you've been standing outside since dawn. Because people had been standing outside since dawn. People camped overnight. People drove across state lines. In Los Angeles, hundreds of people in Rick and Morty merch queued around the block at a McDonald's on La Brea, and when it became clear there wasn't enough, the crowd started shoving at the door to get at the tickets you needed to redeem a packet. There are videos. There's chanting when I say Szechuan, you say sauce. There's a crowd of over 1,000 at one location that had roughly 70 sauces, being physically pushed back by police. There's a McDonald's in Wellington, Florida, where the store finally admitted at about 2:30 in the afternoon that they didn't have any, and 2 sheriff's deputies had to come and disperse the crowd. Nobody would say who called them. A 15-year-old called Kurt Nolan told a reporter, straight-faced, that it was a scam, that they'd made everyone buy food and believe there was sauce, which, honestly, is a better summary than most of the coverage managed. And there were children crying in car parks. That's the detail I can't get past. There are parents on Twitter that day describing 9-year-olds in tears who said they might never eat there again. Then the resale market opened. Packets went up on eBay for hundreds of dollars. A bundle of 3 reportedly went past 800. One person traded a car, an actual car, for a sachet of sauce from 1998, which by then was 19 years past its best. Roiland got out in front of it the next day. He tweeted that they'd had nothing to do with the McDonald's stuff, that he wasn't happy with how it had been handled, and this is the important bit. Please be cool to the employees, it's not their fault. Adult Swim confirmed to the press that it hadn't been their promotion or anyone officially connected to the show. Harmon took a small dig at McDonald's at New York Comic Con about the way they'd quietly co-opted the show to build hype. McDonald's apologised that same day with a tweet about the best fans in the multiverse and being sorry not everyone could get some. The make good, though, was genuinely impressive corporate grovelling, and I respect it. On the 22nd of February 2018, they launched a website called We Want the Sauce. They put out a proper apology, admitting they'd meant well, but hadn't anticipated the overnight crowds, the cross-state travel, or the sheer energy of it, and that their limited batch clearly wasn't close to enough. They said they wanted to fully make amends. They also made a podcast explaining the history of the sauce, which is still available on major podcast platforms, and which I would quite like to hear. And then on the 26th of February, they shipped 20 million packets to every McDonald's in the United States. Not select locations, all of them. Anyone who wanted it just had to ask. It went mostly smoothly, with only a few minor isolated incidents, nothing happened. They brought it back again in 2017, and chaos happened then too. Here's my honest reaction to the whole thing, and I've thought about it more than is healthy. The joke in that episode is that Rick would collapse a galactic government over a condiment, and that this is a symptom of him being deeply unwell. A meaningful slice of the audience heard that and thought, yes, correct, and then went and did a slightly smaller version of it in person. That's not a fandom misreading a show. That's a fandom reading it perfectly and deciding to be the punchline anyway. There's a particular thing that happens when you tell someone you like Rick and Morty. A small pause, a slight recalibration. You can watch them deciding what kind of person you are. That's not really about the show. That's about a copy-paster. If you've somehow missed it, at some point around 2017, somebody wrote a very long, very pompous post about how you have to have a really high IQ to appreciate Rick and Morty, and how the humour goes over most people's heads, and how there's a subtle Russian literature reference in Rick's nihilistic worldview, and how the fans understand this stuff. It reads exactly like someone who has recently discovered that other people are stupid. I've never been able to nail down for certain where it originally came from, and I'd be slightly suspicious of anyone who claims they can. Reddit, probably, in that general era. What matters is what happened to it. It started as fans winding each other up. Then it escaped, and within about a year, it stopped being an in-joke and became the standard way to dismiss anyone who liked the show. 14 years of television, and the cultural shorthand became a paragraph, written by a stranger who was almost certainly joking. And the frustrating part is that it stuck because it wasn't entirely unearned. There genuinely was a stretch where a chunk of the audience behaved insufferably. The season delays were a running battle. The gaps between seasons were enormous in the early years, and Harmon and Roiland both got a steady stream of people demanding to know where the next season was, in a tone that suggested somebody had been personally robbed. The show ended up joking about it on screen, but I want to put a slightly more boring frame on this because I think it's the accurate one. Rick and Morty was the #1 comedy across all of cable for 4 consecutive seasons. Not the #1 animated comedy, the #1 comedy. That is an enormous number of people, and Harmon's shrug from earlier applies here more than anywhere. A very large fandom contains a small awful fandom, and a small percentage of an enormous number is still an enormous number. The show didn't attract a uniquely poisonous audience, it attracted a colossal one, and the loud, unpleasant fraction of a colossal audience is loud enough to define it in the public imagination forever. I should also admit that I have absolutely quoted that copypaster unironically at a party several years ago, believing I was being charming. I was not. Anyway. Now, since we've been talking about Dan Harmon, we should probably go back to the very start of 2018, because that's a story he ended up telling on himself. A bit of background first, because you need it. Before Rick and Morty, Harmon created Community for NBC. It ran from 2009, it was extremely good, and it was a chaotic place to work. He got fired from it in 2012 over what was politely described as erratic behaviour, and was later brought back. Megan Gans was a junior writer there, roughly between 2009 and 2012. She went on to write for Modern Family, It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, and The Last Man on Earth. On New Year's Eve 2017, Harmon posted a tweet. He said it had truly been the year of the asshole, himself included, and that we didn't have to make 2018 the year of the mensch, but he hoped it could be the year of not as much of an asshole. He tagged it realistic goals. A few days later, Gans quote tweeted it with one line, "Care to be more specific? Redemption follows allocution." Allocution is the legal term for the bit where a defendant stands up and describes, in their own words, what they actually did. She'd chosen it deliberately. What followed was a public back and forth, and it's an unusual one to read because both people are good at writing. Harmon said he hadn't wanted to add narcissism to injury, by naming her without permission, but that he'd talked on his podcast about lines he'd crossed and would talk about it more in whatever way she thought was just, and that he was deeply sorry. He called himself an awful boss and a selfish baby who'd abused a position of power. She said his behaviour had made her question her own talent, and that what she wanted was relief, to be able to watch the first episode of television she ever wrote without remembering what came afterwards. There was criticism of him at the time for putting the repair work on her. At one point he said he'd feel a lot of relief if she told him there was a way to fix it, which is a heavy thing to hand to someone. Then on the 10th of January 2018, he did it properly. On the episode of his podcast Harmontown titled Don't Let Him Wipe or Flush, about 18.5 minutes in, he talked for roughly 7 minutes without stopping. He opened by explaining why he was doing it at all. He said the most important advice he'd gotten was from women he respected, who do what he does, who told him privately that if he was sincere, then the way to be part of the solution was to talk about how he'd been part of the problem. Then he laid it out. He said the most clinical way he could put it in confessing to his crimes was that he'd been attracted to a writer he had power over because he was the showrunner, and he'd known enough to know those feelings were bad news. He was very careful about the language. He said, a huge part of the problem is a culture where you tell yourself your feelings are unique and significant because they're happening to you. So you say things like, I had feelings for and I fell for, which dresses the whole thing up. He said he did the cowardly, laziest thing available, which was not dealing with them, and that by not dealing with them, he made everyone else deal with them, especially her. He said he lied to himself about it the entire time, and told himself he was being a mentor. He broke up with his live-in girlfriend to justify the attraction. He told Gans he loved her. She didn't feel the same, and she tried to explain that his feelings, given he was her boss, made it impossible for her to know whether she was any good at her job. And then he said he treated her cruelly, pointedly. He said he did things he would never have done if she'd been male and if he'd never had those feelings, and that this was the darkest part of it, because the message underneath it was that if you're just going to be a writer, this is how just writers get treated. He said he drank and he took pills. He said he lost his job, ruined his show, betrayed the audience, destroyed everything, and damaged her internal compass. And he said if she hadn't mentioned it on Twitter, he'd have carried on not thinking about it, though he'd walked around with his stomach in knots regardless. He finished by asking people not to hurt her. Don't make this worse on anybody but me. The next day, Gans publicly forgave him. She called it a masterclass in how to apologise, and pointed out specifically that he doesn't rationalise, doesn't justify, doesn't make excuses, doesn't vaguely gesture at some general wrongdoing in the past. He gives a full account. And she explained why she was doing it in public. This was never about vengeance, it was about vindication, and she'd already accepted his apology privately. But if any part of the process ought to happen in the light, it's the forgiveness. I find this one sits very oddly in a list of scandals, because it's the only entry in the entire video where the process worked. Somebody was harmed, somebody named it, somebody gave a genuinely complete account without hedging, and the person harmed got to decide what happened next. That's not nothing. I'd also say, in fairness, that not everyone agreed at the time that a good apology settles it, and there were pieces written then arguing that a well-constructed 7 minutes doesn't undo years. Both of those things can be true at once, and mostly are. And here's a detail about the timing that always struck me. 6 months after that, something from 2009 surfaced that he had a much harder time explaining. In July of 2018, Harmon was at San Diego Comic-Con doing a drunken fake radio show panel with Roiland and the voice actress, Cassie Steele. Standard convention chaos, everyone having a nice time. And while that was happening, somebody dug up a video from 2009. It was a Channel 101 short called Daryl, made as a parody of the Showtime serial killer drama Dexter, with Harmon playing the lead. In the version he made, the character's crime is assaulting an infant. There's a doll involved. That is genuinely all I'm going to say about it, because there is no version of describing it further that serves any purpose whatsoever. The context around it mattered enormously, though. This was the middle of a very specific internet season, the era where the dominant political weapon online was the archive. A few days earlier, James Gunn had been fired from Guardians of the Galaxy over a decade-old set of tweets, and there was an organised effort running to find that kind of material on as many people as possible. The Harmon video went into that machine and travelled fast. He deleted his Twitter account almost immediately. His statement, when it came, was short and did not try to defend the thing at all. He said that in 2009 he made a pilot which tried to parody Dexter and only succeeded in offending. He said he'd quickly realised the content was far too distasteful and had taken the video down immediately at the time. And he said nobody should ever have had to see what they saw, and that for that he sincerely apologised. Adult Swim put out its own statement, acknowledging he'd done something wrong, noting the video was nearly a decade old and that he'd removed it back then, and then stopped. No suspension, no review, no suggestion he might leave the show. The practical backdrop to that, which I don't think was a coincidence, is that Adult Swim had renewed Rick and Morty in May of that year for 70 additional episodes. That was one of the largest renewals in the network's history, and one of the largest for any series full stop. They had just committed to the better part of a decade of this show. Whatever the internal conversation was in July, that number was sitting in the middle of the table. He stayed. It faded within a fortnight, as these things did. My honest read on this one is a bit uncomfortable, which is probably correct. The video is indefensible, and he didn't defend it. He'd also, self-evidently, made and published it, and then removed it himself years before anyone came looking, which is at least the behaviour of someone who worked out on his own, that he'd got it badly wrong. And the reason it surfaced when it did had nothing to do with anyone caring about the video, and everything to do with a pile-on economy that was, at that specific moment, running at full tilt in both directions. Grim period, all round. The funniest thing about the most hated episode of Rick and Morty is that the people who made it broadly agree with the people who hated it. Season 5, Episode 4, aired the 11th of July, 2021. Written by Nick Rutherford, directed by Erica Hayes. The plot delivered as briskly as I can manage. Morty goes along to his mum's horse hospital, discovers a piece of breeding equipment, and misuses it repeatedly over the course of a week. Rick, entirely unaware, takes a barrel of what he believes is horse semen and builds a bioweapon out of it to use against an underground race of cannibalistic horse people called Chuds, which are a reference to a 1984 horror film and are not in any way the point. The weapon produces an army of giant sentient sperm that threaten the country. The plan to defeat them involves enlarging one of Summer's eggs to use as bait. Morty confesses the origin of the sperm slightly too late. The episode ends with a giant incest baby being created when a fertilized egg is launched into space. That's it. That's the episode. The reaction was immediate and it was loud. Rotten Tomatoes has the critics around 56%, which for this show is a collapse. It routinely tops lists of the worst episodes. And the interesting thing about the complaints, if you actually read them, is that they're mostly not about crudeness. Rick and Morty had done gross before, and people were fine. The complaint was that it mistook gross for clever, that it was an episode built entirely out of shock with nothing underneath, and that the show had forgotten people watch it for the ideas. But here's the gift. Adult Swim put out one of their Inside the Episode featurettes for it, and the people who made the thing are remarkably candid. Nick Rutherford, the writer, opens by saying he doesn't know how this is an episode, not as a bit. He genuinely seems to be working through it, and he closes by saying he thinks it turned out disgusting and tasteless. Harmon says the only element of the concept that actually excited him was a scene where Beth and Summer ride giant sperm like something out of Jumanji. The director, Erica Hayes, essentially laughs and shrugs at the creation of the incest baby. Rutherford also described the script going through multiple rewrites, mostly to sort out who knew what and when, because Harmon had a rule that the story couldn't hinge on a character simply lying. The underground horse people were added very late as, in his words, a random left turn, and Harmon apparently took that as a sign everyone was having fun. So the behind-the-scenes commentary for the show's most notorious episode is three people going, "Yeah, we're not sure either. I'll give you the defense because there is one, and it's better than people admit." It aired directly after a Rick Convenient Mort, which is one of the bleakest half hours the show ever made. Morty falls in love with an environmental superhero, and it ends badly, 2 episodes after he'd already accepted that his long-term crush was never happening. That's a lot of romantic damage for a kid in a very short stretch. There's a real structural argument for putting something deliberately weightless directly afterwards. And the baby does come back later in the season, so it wasn't purely disposable. My own take, and I know this is the minority position, I think it's fine, not good. Fine. It commits to its own stupidity with total sincerity, which counts for something, and it is at least trying to do a thing rather than coasting. What actually annoys me about it is unrelated to any of the shock stuff. It's that there's a genuinely sharp thread running through it about Summer coming up with the plan that saves everyone, and a man taking the credit, and the episode keeps almost getting to it, and then wandering off to look at another sperm. There was a much better episode in there. Nobody had the patience to find it. There's a whole genre of list article called Rick and Morty episodes that went too far, and I want to poke at it a bit, because most of the entries on it are things the show fully intended to feel bad. Take the one that genuinely does land hardest. Season 1, Episode 5, Me Seeks and Destroy. Everybody remembers it for the Me Seeks box and Jerry failing to improve his golf swing. What people don't put on the merchandise is the bathroom scene with King Jellybean, where Morty is cornered and assaulted, escapes, and then never tells anyone. It's played completely straight. There's no punchline anywhere in it. And then at the end of the episode, Jellybean turns up as a beloved public figure, and Rick shoots him without explanation, and without ever telling Morty why. It's the most upsetting 30 seconds the show has produced, and it's the one moment in a decade of Rick and Morty where the writers never went back and made it a joke, not once, which I think is the correct call and also the reason it sits in people's heads. Then you get the ones that are just about taste. Season 4, Episode 4, Claw and Hoarder, Special Rick Tim's Morty, from 2019, which got hit fairly hard at the time for leaning almost entirely on sex gags and a dragon orgy at the expense of having a plot. Season 6, Episode 3, Bethic Twinstinct, aired the 18th of September 2022, in which Beth and Space Beth, who are, depending on how you read the show, either clones of each other or one original and one copy, get together. Divisive in exactly the way you'd expect. What's interesting about it is that the show plays it as a serious character beat rather than a gag, and the writers have talked about it as one. That's part of why it landed the way it did. If it had been a 2-second cutaway, nobody would remember it. And then there's the stuff that isn't about sex at all and is somehow worse. Season 2's Look Who's Purging Now, where the whole gag is that Morty finally lets himself go on a planet with a legal purge, and it turns out that what's under there isn't liberation. It's a kid emptying a rifle into people who are hiding, and the interdimensional cable material, particularly the leprechaun cereal mascot bit in the second one, which I'm not going to describe, and which is the show at its most gleefully indefensible. Now, some housekeeping while we're here, because it comes up constantly and people get it wrong. Adult Swim broadcast 2 cuts of this show, a censored TV-14 version with the swearing bleeped, and an uncensored TV-MA version. Streaming platforms generally carry the uncensored one. The pattern over the years is that later seasons are actually more heavily censored on broadcast than the early ones, partly because the writing got filthier, partly because network standards tightened. There are reports of small trims in specific territories, including to the opening scene of Lawn Mower Dog, which involves Morty and 2 women, and is exactly as questionable as you're imagining. But no episode has ever been permanently pulled anywhere. There is a lost Rick and Morty episode. There's no shelved one. Occasionally, an episode has vanished from a digital provider for a day because something broke, and people have reliably decided that was censorship, and it never was. Which brings me to my actual opinion on this whole category. A list of Rick and Morty moments that went too far is almost entirely a list of moments that were built to feel wrong. That's a strange thing to call a scandal. The jelly bean scene is the exception, and it's the exception precisely because the show treated it seriously. This one is small and quiet, and I love it. So we're doing it. Picture people freeze-framing a cartoon. Not for a lore Easter egg, not for a hidden Rick, for a string of letters and numbers that flashed up for a fraction of a second, and that most of the audience registered as visual noise. The episode is Final Desmithation, Season 6, Episode 5, written by Heather Ann Campbell, aired the 2nd of October 2023. The plot involves an imprisoned alien being forced to write fortune cookies, which is already a decent premise. Towards the climax, a sequence of codes appears on screen. GFHG 19SDGM, 721DLLM, 19HK831. To almost everybody watching, that's set dressing. To people in Hong Kong, it's immediately legible. Those are shorthand codes for the chants and the dates of the 2019 democracy protests, including the 21st of July and the 31st of August, both of which refer to specific incidents that year that people there do not need explained to them. Fans spotted it within days and started explaining it on Reddit and elsewhere. And the reaction split in a way that tells you a lot. Plenty of people were straightforwardly delighted that somebody had smuggled it in. But a lot of the comments were worried that the episode would get pulled in Hong Kong, where the show was streaming on HBO Go, and worried specifically that if this got too much attention and the company decided to kowtow, whoever had done it would lose their job. That's the part that stayed with me. The immediate instinct wasn't celebration. It was concern for a person they'd never met and couldn't name. AFP contacted both Adult Swim and Warner Brothers. Neither replied. As far as I can find, nobody has ever publicly claimed responsibility for putting those codes on screen, and nothing whatsoever happened. No takedown, no statement, no consequence. And the contrast worth drawing here is South Park, who took the same subject on in 2019 with an entire episode about Hollywood self-censoring for the Chinese market. Within days, the show had been scrubbed off the Chinese internet, gone from the streaming sites, gone from the search results, gone from the forums. Then Parker and Stone put out a mock apology about loving money more than freedom, which was very funny, and also confirmed there was nothing left to lose. Rick and Morty did it in 3 strings of characters that lasted about a second, and got away with it completely. I don't want to overstate it. It's not activism, it's a 9-frame gesture buried in a cartoon about fortune cookies, but somebody in that building chose to put it there, knowing the show is distributed by Warner Brothers across markets, where that is genuinely a problem, and knowing they'd probably never get credit. It cost the show nothing, and it meant an enormous amount to a small number of viewers. Good. This next stretch is the serious part of the video, and I'm going to handle it the way I'd want it handled, plainly, with the dates and the documents, and without dressing any of it up. Here's the timeline as it exists in the court record. The alleged incident is dated on or about the 19th of January 2020 in Orange County, California. The person involved is identified in the paperwork only as Jane Doe. She was dating Justin Roiland at the time and living with him. In May of 2020, the Orange County District Attorney filed charges. 2 felony counts, one of domestic battery with corporal injury, one of false imprisonment by menace, violence, fraud, and/or deceit. The complaint stated that his actions caused what the law calls a traumatic condition. He was arrested and released on a $50,000 bond in August of 2020 and arraigned that October, where he pleaded not guilty to both counts. A protective order was filed in October 2020 and entered in the court minutes. He was ordered not to harass, threaten, or surveil the person named in it. He was ordered to stay at least 100 feet away. He was ordered to turn in any firearms he owned or possessed. The order was set to run until October of 2023. Over the following 2 years, the case went through more than a dozen hearings, most of them pre-trial. No trial date was ever set. Much of the file was sealed. The body camera footage, the police reports, the abuse investigation reports, the medical reports, and the recordings of interviews were all withheld from public view under a protective order. If convicted on both counts, he was facing up to about 7 years. And here is the thing I still find genuinely difficult to get my head around. Nobody knew. For nearly 3 years, the co-creator and the voice of both title characters of one of the biggest shows on television was going in and out of an Orange County courtroom, and it did not exist as a public fact. Season 5 was written, recorded, animated, and aired during that window. So was Season 6. He did conventions, he did press, he appeared on panels in front of thousands of people, he co-founded and ran a video game studio that shipped a hit in 2022. All of it was happening on one side of a wall, and the case was on the other. Then on the 12th of January, 2023, NBC News obtained the criminal complaint and published. The Associated Press got hold of it the same day, and it went everywhere within hours. Roiland's attorney T. Edward Wellborn put out a statement immediately. He said it was hard to overstate how inaccurate the recent media coverage had been. He said that not only was his client innocent, but they had every expectation the matter was on course to be dismissed once the district attorney's office had completed its methodical review of the evidence. He said they looked forward to clearing Justin's name and helping him move forward as swiftly as possible. And at that moment, on the 12th of January, that was the entire public picture. A 2-year-old sealed case, 2 felony charges, a not guilty plea, a lawyer saying it would be dismissed, and no trial date. And that was the whole of the public picture on that particular Thursday. The fortnight that follows is mostly a sequence of very short corporate statements. So let's go through those. I want to take this next bit slowly, because the speed of it is the story. The 16th of January, 2023. 4 days after the charges became public. Squanch Games, the video game studio Roiland co-founded in 2016, which had just shipped High on Life, the biggest Game Pass launch of the previous year, receives his resignation. This is publicly announced on January 24, 2023. It just happens quietly at first, internally, before Squanch Games publicly announces his resignation. The 24th of January, Adult Swim ends it. The statement went out from the show's own Twitter account and was retweeted by the network, and its first sentence is 9 words long. Adult Swim has ended its association with Justin Roiland. The rest of the post is about the show continuing and the talented and dedicated crew being hard at work on Season 7. Marie Moore, the Senior Vice President of Communications at Warner Bros. Discovery, confirmed the roles would be recast. That's it. No paragraph about the seriousness of the allegations, no expression of support for anyone, no acknowledgement that a co-creator existed, a sentence and a note about the crew. Later that same evening, Squanch Games goes public with the resignation. The 25th of January. 20th Television Animation and Hulu Originals put out their own statement, which is almost identically bare. We have ended our association with Justin Roiland. That removed him from Solar Opposites, which he co-created, executive produced, and starred in as the lead character. It also removed him from Koala Man, where he was a producer and a voice, a show that had premiered on the 9th of January, 16 days earlier. He was fired off a show that had been on air for a fortnight. So, 12 days from a court filing becoming a headline to having no employer anywhere. He didn't lose a job. He lost most of his jobs at once, including one at a company he'd founded himself. Then 2 months later, the case fell apart. On the 22nd of March 2023, the Orange County District Attorney's Office dismissed both charges. Their spokesperson, Kimberly Edds, said they dismissed them because there was insufficient evidence to prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt. She also said that significant additional information had come to light and did not specify what that was, and as far as I'm aware, never has. Wellborn thanked the office for what he called a thorough review of the facts and said he was thankful justice had prevailed. Roiland posted a statement on Twitter under the heading, Justice. He said he'd always known the claims were false and never doubted this day would come. He said he was thankful the case had been dismissed but remained deeply shaken by what he described as the horrible lies reported about him during the process. He said he was disappointed that so many people were quick to judge without knowing the facts, based solely on the word of an embittered ex trying to bypass due process and have him cancelled. He said that it may have partly succeeded was shameful, and he finished by saying that now the legal case had ended, he was determined to move forward and focus on his creative projects and restoring his good name. Neither Adult Swim nor Hulu reversed anything. Neither commented at all. Hulu declined when asked, while Adult Swim pointed back to its earlier statement that it had ended its association. And I think it's worth being careful and boring about what a dismissal like this actually means, because in March of 2023, the internet immediately split into two camps who both had the answer. A dismissal for insufficient evidence is not a finding that nothing happened. It is also not a finding that something did. It is a prosecutor's office concluding that they could not meet the standard required to convict, which is a very high standard and is supposed to be. It resolves the criminal question and it resolves nothing else. Both camps took the reading they'd already decided on and got on with their day. That was where it sat for 6 months. On the 13th of September 2023, NBC News published a second, much larger piece by the reporter Kat Tenbarge, and it wasn't about the court case at all. I'm going to report this the way it was reported and then move on. No detail beyond what you need to understand what was alleged. The investigation was built on interviews with 11 women and non-binary people who had exchanged messages with Roiland between 2013 and 2022. They shared thousands of those messages with the outlet. They also provided photographs, videos, social media posts, emails, and plane ticket and Uber receipts, which NBC used to corroborate the accounts. 9 of the 11 said that he turned the exchanges sexual. Of those 9, 3 said they were 16 years old when they first began talking to him. NBC reported that the messages it reviewed supported those accounts. The broad pattern described across the piece was this: he followed and interacted with young fans of the show on social media and on dating apps. He complimented them, calling them cute or hot. He asked their ages. In some cases he asked to meet, and in some cases arranged travel. 2 more serious allegations were reported. I'm going to state that they exist and not describe them. One woman said she was assaulted after meeting him through a dating app. Another said she was flown out to Los Angeles and pressured there. NBC reported that it had reviewed messages in which he later apologized to both women. Several people chose to be named publicly, and I think that deserves respecting, so I'll name them. Jana Waters, who is non-binary, said they were a 16-year-old high school student when he first messaged them, and that they came to believe they had been groomed. Veronica Sweeney, a tattoo artist, said she posted her own DMs specifically to add to what she described as a mountain of evidence and a pattern of behaviour. Her point being that any single exchange looks like nothing, and the pattern is the thing. Ali Goertz, a former editor at Mad, described receiving propositions and unsolicited material, and said she felt he had taken advantage of somebody who could not have been a bigger fan of his work. Roiland's lawyer, Andrew Brettler, wrote to NBC calling the allegations false and defamatory. When Variety followed up asking for comment, Brettler declined to say anything further about the new allegations and directed them back to the statement Roiland had posted in March. Roiland himself has not posted publicly since that March statement. Dan Harmon spoke to The Hollywood Reporter shortly afterwards, and it's the only time he's addressed it. He said he was frustrated, ashamed, and heartbroken. He said trust had now been violated between countless people and a show that was designed to please them. And he said he was heartbroken that a lot of hard work, joy, and passion could be leveraged to exploit and harm strangers. He did not address any specific allegation. That last phrase of his is the one that did the damage, I think. Leveraged. The suggestion isn't just that a person did things, it's that the show itself, the affection people had for it, the thing that made a stranger excited to get a message, became the instrument. Those are the reported facts. No charges were filed in relation to any of it. So that's where the show stood going into October of 2023. Which brings us to the recasting, and that's a much more ordinary story about auditions. Let's talk about the actual production problem, because it's a genuinely interesting one, and it's a relief to be back in the land of craft. Roiland voiced both leads. He also voiced Mr. Poopy Butthole and Mr. Meeseeks, and a long list of secondary characters, plus most of the Ricks and most of the Mortys on the Citadel. So when the network says the roles will be recast, what they're actually saying is that they need to replace something like half the voices in the show, all of which belong to the same throat, and most of which the audience knows better than they know their own neighbours. The first decision was the smart one. They chose not to find a single impressionist who could cover everything, partly because it's an unreasonable thing to ask of one person's vocal cords across 10 episodes a year, and partly because the whole reason Roiland could do it was that he'd invented the voices in the first place and could sit in them without effort. Imitating them is a completely different physical job, so they split it up and went looking. The search ran roughly 6 months. Scott Marder, the showrunner, told The Hollywood Reporter they heard thousands of candidates. He's described finding a match for Rick specifically as grueling. Rick's voice has a burp, a wobble, a constant sliding pitch and a habit of trailing off mid-word, and finding somebody who could do all of that and still act was apparently very close to impossible. Marder has said the casting went right down to the wire. What they landed on was this: Ian Cardoni as Rick, a working actor since childhood, with a background in promotional voiceover, including narration work for WWE, and for whom character voices had been more of a hobby than a career. Harry Belden as Morty, theatre, commercial voiceover, some One Chicago credits, and John Allen as Mr. Poopy Butthole, brought in specifically so that Cardoni and Belden could put all their stamina into the leads, rather than spreading it around. Later on, Ice-T took over Mag McHugh in the episode Rise of the Numbricans, which is a fairly hard upgrade to argue with, and they kept it secret. Completely. Nobody outside the production knew who'd been cast until the Season 7 premiere went out on the 15th of October 2023. On top of that, the SAG-AFTRA strike was running, which meant that once the episode aired, the two of them still weren't allowed to promote it. They'd landed the biggest recasting job in animation and had to sit on their hands. They gave their first interviews about 5 weeks later, Belden has said the first month was genuinely disorientating. He kept asking his girlfriend whether it had actually happened, whether he was really the new Morty. Cardoni came in as a fan of 10 years and talked about it in terms of responsibility rather than opportunity. On how long it took to feel natural, Belden said he found his rhythm somewhere around the 3rd or 4th episode. Cardoni said he wasn't sure there was a single moment where it clicked, and that it was an ongoing process. Both said, more or less identically, that they don't read the comments. Belden said he's not allowed to. The premiere itself, how Poopy got his poop back, made an interesting choice. It's barely about Rick and Morty. It's centred on Mr. Poopy Butthole having a breakdown and everyone staging an intervention, with Bird Person and Squanchy and Gearhead all showing up. Which, whether by design or by accident, means the first thing the audience heard from the new cast was buried in an ensemble rather than dropped in cold. It did not save them from what came next. Season 7 is, on the aggregate sites, the lowest rated season the show has ever had. Rotten Tomatoes has it at around 63% from critics and, more brutally, a 33% audience score. And when you look at that audience score, it's not a bell curve, it's a wall at each end, a pile of 5-star reviews from people determined to support the show, and a pile of 1-star reviews, a great many of which are explicitly about Roiland being gone, rather than about anything in the episodes. Harmon talked about it with Gizmodo, and I think his description of the modern internet is the best thing anyone has said on the subject. He said the internet is so balkanized now that even within a single comment section, the only rule is complete polarity. Everything has to be the absolute worst or the absolute best. And that even people who want to say something was mediocre have to say it with such vehemence that you'd think their blood vessels were bursting. He said that unfortunately, it dictates the course of his entire day if he sees the wrong thing, so he mostly has to stay away, which means he misses a lot of things he'd probably want to see. Speaking to IO9, he was more measured about the recasting specifically. His read was that the silent, healthy majority were basically at, okay, this is as good as you could manage, and that there was a contingent insisting the voices were unignorably, catastrophically different, which with a couple of years of distance is roughly how it settled. By season 7 the argument had mostly gone quiet, and a decent number of critics had come round to saying the performances were close to indistinguishable, with a few going further and arguing the new pair sounded more engaged than the last couple of Roiland seasons had. One contrast worth flagging, because it's the road not taken. Solar Opposites did the exact opposite thing. They cast Dan Stevens as Corvo and let him use a completely different voice. No imitation at all. The show simply acknowledged that the character sounded different now and moved on, which spares the new actor from ever being graded against a recording. Two entirely reasonable answers to the same problem, and I genuinely don't know which one I'd have picked. There's a strange administrative detail here that I think about more than I should. Justin Roiland's solo Vanity Card Productions, that's the actual name, exclamation mark and all, was founded on the 15th of March, 2013, out of Burbank. It produced Rick and Morty. It also produced Solar Opposites, Koala Man, and Hot Streets. And its logo still appears at the end of every episode of Rick and Morty made since he was fired. He's still credited as co-creator and as an executive producer on every season since, alongside the company, so he is contractually and permanently attached to a show he has had nothing to do with for years, and the credit rolls past every single week. That's not a scandal exactly, it's just one of those pieces of entertainment industry plumbing that's slightly surreal when you notice it. Squanch Games carried on without him. He'd co-founded it in 2016 with Tanya Watson, who'd previously been at Epic and Microsoft. They made Trover Saves the Universe and then High on Life in 2022, which as mentioned was the biggest Game Pass launch of that year. After his resignation, the studio kept going, and High on Life 2 shipped day one on Game Pass on the 13th of February 2026. Solar Opposites ran on to a 6th season and finished. Koala Man continued. And meanwhile, this is the part that surprises people. The franchise kept getting bigger. Rick and Morty, the anime, arrived with an English dub premiere on Adult Swim on the 15th of August, 2024, directed by Takashi Sano at Telecom Animation Film. It got its own smaller backlash, though a much sillier one. A big chunk of the Western fan base took one look at the trailer and decided the animation looked cheap or unfinished, mostly because it uses a deliberately lo-fi experimental style rather than the clean vector look of the main show. And then everybody spent months arguing about whether it was canon, which for this fandom is a blood sport, because if it is canon, then it does things to the multiverse rules that people have very strong feelings about. At New York Comic Con in 2024, the show was renewed through season 12. At San Diego in 2025, they announced a spin-off built around President Curtis, with Keith David back in the role, which is a genuinely great idea, and I'm not going to pretend to be neutral about it. The comics kept running. The Vindicators kept expanding. The merchandise never stopped for a second. Which leaves you with a fairly odd fact to sit with. This show lost half of its creative core in the most public way available, and the franchise around it grew. Not survived, grew. I don't have a tidy lesson to attach to that. It's just true, and it doesn't feel like it should be. Right, one more proper controversy, and this one's the most recent, and it ends with the show quietly changing its mind about something, which almost never happens. On the 6th of July, 2025, Season 8 aired an episode called Rick-a-Than Fiction, written by Rob Schrab, directed by Douglas Einar Olsen. The setup: Rick and Morty are watching the 9th installment of their favourite blockbuster franchise, which is called Maximum Velocity and is about robot trees. Jerry is loving it. Rick and Morty are furious with the show's writers and directors about the creative direction. Too many comic relief characters, weak villains. So Rick demands to speak to the manager and portals into the office of the director. The director is James Gunn, voicing himself as the antagonist of the episode. Gunn's argument, on screen, is that making films is hard, that the script for the 10th one had been through so many rewrites that even he thought it would take a miracle, and that fans have no idea. Rick takes the script anyway. Later, Zack Snyder turns up, also voicing himself, giving Gunn notes on Superman, that he talks too much, doesn't punch enough people, and needs more overcrank. This aired days before Gunn's Superman opened in cinemas. The way it came together is genuinely charming. Marder told Variety that the plan was to skewer Hollywood, and they decided that if they were going to do that, they had to include their own bosses. So they thought about Warner Brothers and landed on Gunn as the face of it. Schrab reached out, expecting a no, given the man was in the middle of finishing a Superman film. Gunn said yes instantly, and apparently ran it up the chain at Warner Brothers the same day. People on the production side were baffled about how the studio already knew. He came into the booth the morning after he wrapped principal production. Harmon personally wrote the Gunn and Snyder exchange, and the two of them recorded back-to-back. Marder said both were good sports, that they implied Rick and Morty was what they watched in their downtime, and that they laughed at everything thrown at them, and that there were more digs available that never got used. The device at the centre of the plot is a machine Rick builds called the Movie'Lizer. You feed it a script, and it produces the film, and you can type a tweak, and it fills in the rest. It is, unmistakably, a generative AI model. Rick and Morty prompt it, then get sucked inside their own edits, leaving Jerry outside to write them back out. And the reception was not what anyone expected. Two separate complaints. The first was the sheer volume of corporate cross-promotion, an episode that is functionally a Warner Bros. Lot tour, airing the same week as a Warner Bros. Tentpole on a Warner Bros. Network. One outlet called it the most shameless piece of cross-promotion in Adult Swim's history, which is a bold claim about Adult Swim, but I take the point. The second was heavier. A lot of viewers came away with the reading that the episode implied an AI could knock out a screenplay roughly as well as a working director could. And landing that in the middle of 2025, while studios were laying off creative staff in large numbers and enthusiastically experimenting with exactly this technology, struck people as badly misjudged. It was widely called the weakest episode of the season. I want to give the counter-argument properly, because I think it's actually the stronger one on the text. What happens in the episode is that Rick and Morty get inside the AI's output, and it's a mess. It's clunky. It's stitched together from every other film the machine ingested. It has no centre, and they have to cobble an ending together out of their own prompts by hand. The episode's actual position, if you read it straight, is that the machine can't do it, and that fans who think they do better are wrong about that too, which is a defensive gun, not an attack on him. But intent isn't the same as landing, and the timing got more awkward a few months later when Sora 2 came out and the internet promptly filled up with AI-generated Rick and Morty imitations. The show's own characters became the raw material of exactly the slop the episode had been playing with. Then on the 11th of March 2026, Adult Swim announced Season 9. And the official synopsis reads, in part, Rick and Morty is back, baby. Season 9 is all certified bangers. No AI slop. Just grade A organic slop, made by real humans with real human traits like back hair and cysts. Please watch, or we'll have neglected our families for nothing. Michael Owerlein, the president of Adult Swim, put out a statement alongside it about how much talent was being poured into the episodes, and that it was a bit frightening what the unit was managing season over season. So that's a show which has spent more than a decade refusing to apologise for anything, changing its public position on the biggest question in its industry, inside a joke in a press release. Nobody said the word reversal. Nobody needed to. It also, not coincidentally, followed a fair amount of fan grumbling that Season 8 had been a step down. I think that's a genuinely graceful way to move. You don't get a statement, you don't get a mea culpa, you get one line about back hair and cysts and everyone understands exactly what's being said. We touched on this earlier when we were talking about fan entitlement, but the gaps between seasons deserve their own bit because the numbers are genuinely absurd and because they explain a lot of behaviour that otherwise looks like people just being unpleasant for sport. Season 1 finished in April 2014. Season 2 started in July 2015. That's fine. Slightly long, nothing outrageous. Season 2 finished in October 2015. Season 3 started with that surprise April Fool's drop on the 1st of April 2017. So a year and a half, and then, and this is the part that broke people, after that surprise premiere, the rest of the season didn't turn up for nearly 4 more months. The remaining episodes started airing on the 30th of July, 2017. Adult Swim gave everybody 1 episode, and then vanished for the length of an entire academic term. Then Season 3 ended on the 1st of October 2017, and Season 4 didn't begin until November 2019, over 2 years, and Season 4 was itself split in half, with 5 episodes in late 2019, and the rest arriving in May 2020, partly because of earlier contract negotiations and production delays. So between late 2015 and mid-2020, which is the exact window in which this show became a global phenomenon, there were an enormous number of months where there was simply nothing. The reasons were mundane. The show is handcrafted in a fiddly way, vector puppet animation, in Toon Boom harmony, with an unusual amount of custom background work, and the budget goes into the design and animation rather than into star salaries. It's roughly $1.2 to $1.5 million an episode, which by the way is less than The Simpsons spends. Beyond that, Harmon's process is slow by design. The room talks about science fiction and their own lives, breaks it into stories, then outlines, then multiple drafts, then a pass from a creator. Season 3 was originally meant to be 14 episodes and came in at 10. The audience response to all of this was, generously, disproportionate. Both creators got a constant stream of people demanding to know where the next season was, and it wasn't friendly asking. The show ended up referencing it internally, and it fed directly into that ownership instinct we talked about. The idea that the audience had a claim on the labour of people they'd never met. What fixed it was the big renewal we mentioned earlier. Once 70 episodes were guaranteed, the whole thing could be planned as a pipeline, rather than as a series of panics. They moved some of the animation to Lighthouse Studios in Kilkenny, alongside Bardell in Vancouver, and from season 7 onwards it has been, more or less, a season every 1 to 2 years. Season 8 in May 2025, Season 9 in May 2026, almost exactly 12 months apart, which for this show is practically indecent haste. Here's my honest reaction. The gaps were maddening, and I complained about them too. But everything people loved about seasons 1 to 3 came out of the same slow, argumentative, unhurried process that caused the gaps, and I've never seen a convincing argument that you could have had one without the other. You cannot demand a Citadel episode and also demand it in 9 months. Somebody has to sit in a room and be difficult about it for a very long time. Now, since we're on the subject of things this show turned into, let's talk about the money, because the merchandising side of Rick and Morty is a genuinely strange organism, and it has produced at least one thing I still can't quite believe exists. The franchise gets described in analysis pieces as a $100 million merchandising and media operation, which sounds like an exaggeration until you walk through a shopping centre. Apparel, Funko Pops, collectibles, the lot. There are Portal Boys shirts. There are Merry Rickmas shirts, which get restocked every December, like clockwork. And there are, and I want you to sit with this, plumbus earrings. A plumbus, if you've forgotten, is a household object from a fake in-universe advert. The entire joke is that everybody has one, and nobody can explain what it is or what it does. The advert walks you through its manufacturing process in loving detail, and at no point tells you its function. It is a gag about how you can describe something completely and understand nothing. Somebody made that into jewellery, and people bought it. I love that more than I can explain. Then there's the Rickmobile, which is one of the more committed pieces of marketing I've come across. Adult Swim built an enormous custom vehicle shaped like Rick Sanchez's head and body, and drove it around the United States on a tour called the Don't Even Trip Road Trip. It operated as a mobile pop-up shop with exclusive merchandise, so the promotional strategy was, essentially, a giant cartoon man rolling into your town and selling you a t-shirt out of himself. The games did well too. Pocket Mortys came out in 2016 and is an unusually competent parody of Pokemon, where you collect and battle alternate dimension Mortes, which is exactly the kind of joke that only works if you actually build the game properly. And they did. There was a VR title, Virtual Rick-ality, in 2017. The characters turned up as playable fighters in multiverses in 2022. There's a soundtrack album, released through Sub Pop in September 2018. 26 tracks, mostly Ryan Elder's compositions, plus licensed material from Mazzy Star and Chaos and Blonde Redhead. It went to number 1 on the Billboard Comedy Albums chart and number 1 on vinyl albums, and charted in the main 200. The standout is Terryfold, which is a song about a specific part of a fictional alien's anatomy, and which, again, real people bought on vinyl and played in their homes on purpose. More recently, there's been the immersive experience side. Warner Brothers Discovery's Experiences division and a company called Fever put together a 25,000 square foot interactive space in Chicago with SEAL Team Rick Laser Tag, a Mr. Meeseeks golf challenge, portal travel simulators, and themed food and drink. which is a long way from a short film festival in Los Angeles where the audience votes you off. The one bit of the merchandising story that aged badly is the NFT stretch. Roiland got into that fairly enthusiastically in the boom years, art drops, the whole thing, and NBC's later reporting listed it among the ventures his fame had expanded into, alongside the game studio. It's the sort of thing that looks like a side hustle at the time, and reads slightly differently now, mostly because that entire market evaporated and took a lot of people's money with it. And the thing I find genuinely funny about the whole merchandising apparatus is the mismatch. This is a show whose central argument is that consumption is empty, that nothing you buy will fill the hole, and that a man will destroy a galactic government for a sachet of sauce. And you can own his face as a car, a shot glass, a laser tag, arena, and a pair of earrings shaped like an object with no known purpose. I'm not even being sarcastic. That's the joke working correctly. Here's a thread that runs quietly underneath everything else in this video, and I don't think it gets pointed at enough. While all of this was going on, the doxing, the source, the apology, the video, the court file, the television industry was steadily handing this show its highest honours. Rick and Morty won the Emmy for Outstanding Animated Program in 2018 for the Pickle Rick episode, Pickle Rick. That's the one that abandons Rick and Morty entirely for 20 minutes and follows a police procedural, a school drama, and a political campaign among the endless duplicate Ricks and Mortys, ending with Evil Morty getting elected. It is, for my money, the single best thing the show has ever done. And the fact it won is one of the few award decisions I've never wanted to argue with. It won again in 2020 for the Vat of Acid episode. 2 Emmys for Outstanding Animated Program, which is a category that has historically been extremely difficult to get into if you aren't The Simpsons or South Park. And it was, for 4 consecutive seasons, 3 through 6, the #1 comedy across the whole of cable. Not just among cartoons, across everything. Now put those dates next to the rest of the timeline. The 2018 win lands the same year as the Garn's apology in January and the Daryl video in July. The 2020 win lands in the middle of the 3-year window where a sealed criminal case was sitting in an Orange County court and nobody outside a small circle knew about it. The show was collecting statuettes on one side of the wall the whole time. I'm not saying anyone at the Television Academy did anything wrong. They can't vote on information that doesn't exist, but it's a useful reminder of how these things actually work in practice. An award is a snapshot of what a particular room knew on a particular evening, and rooms know very little. The awards also had a very practical effect on the story. A show with that kind of record is a show a network will protect. When the Daryl video surfaced, Adult Swim's response, acknowledge, note it was old, take no action, was the response of a company that had just committed to years of episodes from a proven award winner. When Roiland's case surfaced, the calculation went the other way entirely, but the same underlying logic applied. The asset was the show, not the person. They cut him and kept it, and they were plainly right that the show could survive without him, which is not something anybody would have bet on in January 2023. Awards also did something for the crew, which is the part I actually care about. The 2018 renewal and the awards run were what turned Rick and Morty from a project with an uncertain future into a stable job for a few hundred people. The artists who'd voted to walk out in 2014 were, by the end of the decade, working on one of the most secure gigs in adult animation. Small consolation for the rest of it, but a real one. One of the more interesting things about Rick and Morty as a piece of television is that it has never been able to leave itself alone. It is relentlessly, sometimes exhaustingly, self-aware. And that habit produced some genuinely odd moments once the real-world stuff started. The show has always done this. There's an episode called Never Ricking Morty, which is entirely about the mechanics of storytelling, and in which Dan Harmon's own story circle, the 8-stage structure he teaches, which underpins basically everything he's ever written, appears on screen as a diagram. It also, on the same day, mocks the idea that anyone could sell a story engine to a network. That's the level of navel-gazing we're working with, and it's usually charming. Where it gets stranger is when the meta-commentary starts brushing up against the actual news. There's the Season 8 run-up, where a teaser leaned into a gag about Jerry being recast which, given the show, had just gone through the most public voice recasting in animation, was clearly not an accident. It's a very Rick and Morty move. Take the thing everyone is nervously not mentioning, put it in the marketing, and let people work out whether you're being brave or deflecting. There's the Movie Liza episode we went through, which is a whole half hour of the show, arguing with its own fandom about whether fans could do a better job. Delivered, remember, by the actual head of a film studio playing himself. And there's the cameo culture generally, which the show has leaned on more and more. Hugh Jackman turning up as a version of himself in the Season 7 premiere, which reviewers found bizarre and unmotivated. Ice-T, Logic, Gunn and Snyder. There's a legitimate criticism buried in the reviews of these, that a show which used to make points about society by inventing things has increasingly made them by importing famous people from the news. I have mixed feelings. When it works, which it does with Keith David's President, it's superb. When it doesn't, it feels like a sketch show, and the complaint that the AI episode played like a weaker instalment of Saturday Night Live with a guest host is not entirely unfair. But there's a version of self-awareness the show has done very well, and it's the quiet version. Since Season 7 it has become considerably more serialised. Rick's long hunt for Rick Prime, the wife he lost, the Memory Diane storyline, where he keeps a simulation of her he can't let go of. The show that used to insist nothing matters spent 5 years building an arc about a man who cannot get over something. There's a Harmon line I keep coming back to, where he confirmed that the episode people usually name as the show's best is fundamentally about alcoholism, which is the thing about Rick and Morty that gets lost in all the sauce and the sperm and the copy pasta. Underneath, it has always been a show about a man who is unwell, told by people who were at various points going through things of their own. That's not an excuse for anything, and I'm not offering it as one. But when the show turns the camera on itself, that's usually what it finds. Before we wrap up with where things actually stand, one more bit, and it's the least dramatic entry in the video, which after everything else is quite nice. There's a permanent argument in this fandom about whether the show is in decline, and it has been running since roughly 2019. Season 8, which aired from the 25th of May to the 27th of July 2025, is where it got loudest in recent years. The complaints were fairly consistent, that the Movie Liza episode was a misfire, which we've covered, that the season leaned too hard on returning characters and callbacks in a way that felt like the show was managing its own back catalogue rather than inventing. That some episodes felt compartmentalised, with the big serialised arc only surfacing occasionally and the rest sitting in self-contained mayhem. There's a real tension underneath that, and it's worth naming because it's the thing the show has never resolved. Rick and Morty made its name on the idea that anything could happen, that no episode owed the previous one anything, that they could go and do a heist or a dragon story, or 20 minutes with a police force made of duplicate Ricks. That's escapism, and it works because it's untethered. But since Season 7 it has been telling one long story about grief and revenge. Those two impulses fight each other every week. Loosen the arc and people say it's directionless. Tighten it and people say it's lost the anarchy. Season 8 tried to do both and got hit from both directions, which is roughly what happens. The season also had some material people liked a lot. Space Beth back in the mix and the strange father-daughter dynamic that produces. Jerry, who is the butt of every joke in the series, getting an unusual amount of actual attention. A finale that dealt with Rick trying to erase Memory Diane from his own head, which is about as direct a statement about avoidance as the show has made. And then, as we covered, the response was a season 9 that arrived under 10 months later with a press release promising organic slop and a reception noticeably warmer than either of the two before it, which is my favourite thing about the decline argument, honestly. It has been going for 7 years and it has never once been settled, and every single season produces a fresh cohort of people announcing the show is finished and another cohort announcing it's back. Both of them will be here next year, saying the same thing about season 10. I don't think it's in decline. I think it's a 12-year-old show, which is a different condition with similar symptoms. Nothing at year 14 feels like year 3 because you can't be surprised by something twice. Since we're on release schedules, here's a small thing this show and this network did that I think was quietly brilliant and which no longer really works because everyone copied it. Adult Swim have a tradition of doing something stupid on the 1st of April. That's the whole brand. A late night block that behaves like the person running it has gone home and left the keys in the door. They've filled April Fools with all sorts of nonsense over the years. In 2017, they filled it with the entire season 3 premiere of the biggest show they had. No announcement, no press. They just started running the Rick-Shank-Rick-Demption on a loop, over and over, through the night. If you happened to be awake, you got it. If you were asleep, you woke up to the internet screaming about it. That's a genuinely bold thing to do with an asset that size, because the standard playbook says you announce a date 6 weeks out, you run trailers, you get the press cycle, and you harvest a huge simultaneous audience. Adult Swim threw all of that away in favour of a joke, and it worked completely. The episode became an event precisely because nobody had prepared for it. People rang each other. The clips were everywhere by breakfast. And because it was a loop rather than a single airing, it had this odd quality of being a thing you could stumble into at 3 in the morning, which is very much this show's natural habitat. It's also, and this is the bit I like, the reason the source ended up mattering. That episode's closing speech is what put Szechuan sauce back into the world, and it was delivered to an audience that had no idea they were about to be given anything at all. If it had been a normal, announced premiere, the speech is just a joke in an episode. Because it arrived out of nowhere, on a day when everyone was already primed for weirdness, it became a mission statement. The tradition has continued in a softer way, clips dropped without warning, promotional shorts appearing on the YouTube channel with no lead-up, animatics posted months early because somebody felt like it. In February of 2026, they put up a sneak peek animatic for a season 9 episode with essentially no explanation. In March, they dropped a promotional short made by Paul Robertson, the pixel artist, which mostly existed to confirm the season was coming that year. There's a reason it doesn't really work anymore though, and it isn't Adult Swim's fault. Everybody copied it. The surprise drop went from being a stunt to being a standard marketing option, and once every streaming service has done a shadow release, the shadow release stops carrying any surprise. It just becomes another way of scheduling. You can't ambush an audience that has learned to expect ambushes, which is a shame because the thing that made the 2017 version work wasn't the secrecy on its own. It was that the secrecy fit the show. A program about a man who ignores rules on a network that behaves like nobody is supervising it, turning up unannounced at midnight on the one day of the year when nothing you read is trustworthy. All of those pieces agreed with each other. When a prestige drama does a surprise drop, it just feels like a press strategy, because it is one. I've got a lot of affection for a network that still tries. Most of television has become extremely professional about how it hands you things. This one still occasionally just leaves something on the doorstep and walks off. We mentioned this in passing earlier, but Rick and Morty, the anime is odd enough to deserve a proper look. And it's the kind of low-stakes fandom argument that's quite nice to fall asleep on. The background is that Adult Swim had been putting out Rick and Morty anime shorts for a while, made by Solar Entertainment, and they were beautiful, very high fidelity, very slick, and people loved them. So when a full series was announced, expectations were set by those shorts. The series that arrived was made by Telecom Animation Film and directed by Takashi Sano. The English dub premiered on Adult Swim on the 15th of August, 2024, with the Japanese version subtitled on Toonami 2 days later. The physical release followed in April 2025, and a large chunk of the Western fan base took one look at the first trailer and decided it looked cheap. It doesn't look cheap, it looks deliberate. It's a lo-fi, loose, experimental style, different frame rates, different character construction, a completely different relationship to line weight than the clean vector puppetry of the main show. If you've watched much television anime made outside the big budget tier, it's a familiar register. If your entire reference point is the main show and those glossy Solar shorts, it reads as unfinished. That's a taste disagreement dressed up as a quality complaint. And it went on for months on Reddit and X, with people posting frame comparisons and getting genuinely heated about character designs. The other argument, which was the bigger one, was about canon. And you have to understand that canon in this fandom is not a casual topic. This is a show built on a multiverse with actual rules. The Central Finite Curve, the Citadel, Rick Prime, all of it interlocking. People have spreadsheets. So when the second episode featured an entropy device and a Rick variant that seemed to gesture at the main show's lore, everybody started analysing frames for connections. One camp argued it was tied directly into the primary timeline, and therefore introduced some quite significant changes to how time and identity work. The other camp argued the tone was so different that reconciling it with the main show was impossible, and it had to be a separate story. The marketing was ambiguous about which I suspect was deliberate and which certainly kept people arguing. My own view, and I hold it loosely, is that the canon question is the least interesting thing about it, and that the show is much better when you stop asking. It's a version of these characters made by people from a completely different animation tradition, with a completely different relationship to pacing and to silence. Watching it as a translation rather than a sequel makes it a much better time. But then I'd say that because I'm not the person with the spreadsheet. One last thing before we tidy up, and it's the part of the show I'd defend hardest. The interdimensional cable episodes are the ones where the Smith family sits on a sofa and watches television from other realities, and they're structured completely differently from everything else. Most of the content in them isn't written. It's improvised, Roiland and the other performers riffing over rough animation, with the funniest bits kept and animated properly afterwards, which produced some of the most quoted material the show has, and also its most genuinely indefensible content. The Leprechaun cereal advert I mentioned earlier lives in one of these. So does a huge amount of stuff that would never survive a writer's room. Because a writer's room's job is partly to stop you. And that's the thing I find interesting about them. Everything else on this show goes through Harmon's process. The room, the outlines, the drafts, the story circle, the pass from a creator. The cable episodes deliberately skip all of it. They're the only part of Rick and Morty that arrives essentially unfiltered. Summer makes the joke herself in one of them, pointing out that everything they watch eventually collapses into juvenile violence. The show knows exactly what it's doing. There's a school of thought that the cable episodes are lazy, cheap to produce, structurally slack, an excuse to fill 20 minutes with sketches. I think that's half right, and it misses why they work. They're the closest the show gets to what it actually was at Channel 101. A person with a microphone making themselves laugh, with the good bits kept and the rest thrown out. They also do something quite sly. The Smiths sitting on a sofa, half watching infinite television, unable to look away from content that is objectively terrible and inventing nothing, is not a neutral image. It's a show about a family failing to connect, filmed from behind, staring at a screen. Every time I watch one, I clock that and then immediately forget it, because there's a talking cat or a man made of pizza, which is presumably the point. The other thing I like about them is how much they've quietly shaped what the show became. A fair number of the ideas that turned into proper episodes started life as throwaway cable nonsense. A stupid concept mentioned for 4 seconds that somebody in the room later decided deserved 20 minutes. That's not an efficient way to develop television. It's how a person who likes making things actually works. You produce far too much, most of it is rubbish, and occasionally something in the pile turns out to have a whole story hiding in it. They've become rarer as the show has serialized, which makes sense. You can't stop a long revenge arc for a sketch reel without it feeling like a delay. I miss them anyway. Whatever else you say about them, they were the one place this show was completely uncontrolled, and there's not much television left that has a room like that in it. Here's a thing that only really lands once you go looking, which is how much of a certain era of animation was one man. Rick and Morty is the obvious one. But if you grew up on Cartoon Network in the early 2010s, you already knew that voice before you knew the name. He was the Earl of Lemongrab on Adventure Time, which is one of the most alarming performances in a children's cartoon. That shrieking, rigid, unbearable little tyrant who exists in a permanent state of being furious about the concept of other people. It's genuinely brilliant work, and it's also, in hindsight, recognisably the same instrument as Rick, wound up rather than down. He was Blendin' Blandin' on Gravity Falls, the incompetent time agent, which is a lovely small role. He was Oscar on Fish Hooks, a Disney Channel show he also wrote on, which is about fish who go to school, and which is about as far from the rest of his output as you could get. And then on the Hulu side, he was Corvo on Solar Opposites, which he co-created, the lead of the whole show. Not a supporting part, plus other characters on it, plus Leroy on The Polony Show, plus Chad Wagon on Koala Man. So when the January 2023 statements landed, the recasting problem wasn't confined to one series. It was a small industry-wide administrative headache spread across several networks. Solar Opposites, as I mentioned, took the opposite approach to Rick and Morty and gave Corvo to Dan Stevens with an entirely new voice. No imitation attempted. The show acknowledged the change and carried on. And I've gone back and forth on which method I prefer, honestly. Rick and Morty's approach preserves the experience for the audience, but permanently traps two performers in a comparison they can never win outright, because the reference recording is right there on streaming. The Solar Opposites approach frees the actor completely, but asks the audience to accept a change they can hear in the first line. There's no correct answer. There's just which discomfort you'd rather have. Rick and Morty's version has taken years to fully complete, incidentally, because of the sheer volume of one-line characters he'd voiced over 6 seasons. Every so often, another old role would quietly get a new performer, Magma Q going to Ice-T being the most visible one, but there was a long tail of smaller parts. By early 2026, the last of them had been replaced, which is a strange sort of milestone to reach. 6 seasons of a man's voice, gradually and completely painted over, character by character, across 3 years. The Adventure Time and Gravity Falls work sits in a different category because those shows had finished. Nobody is going back to redo Lemongrab. So there's this odd archaeological layer where you can still hear him in a decade of children's television that's now simply part of the record, alongside a decade of Rick and Morty that's been carefully removed. And what you're left with is a genuinely uncomfortable question that nobody has a clean answer to, which is what you do with work. Not with a person, the industry answered that one very quickly and very completely. Work is harder. The episodes exist. Lemongrab exists. 6 seasons of a show a lot of people love exist and are still streaming and will keep streaming. The industry's actual answer in practice has been keep everything, credit him where contracts require it, replace him going forward, and never discuss it again. which isn't a principle. It's just what happened. But I've yet to hear a better one proposed by anybody, including by people who are much angrier about it than I am. So as of right now, where does everything actually stand? Season 9 ran from the 24th of May to the 26th of July, 2026. 10 episodes, weekly, the way they've settled into doing it. It went out in more than 170 countries and in 42 languages, which is a number I find quietly ridiculous for a show that began as a rude cartoon at a short film festival. US streaming followed in mid-June 2026, and it went down well, notably better than 7 or 8, a decent number of critics calling it the strongest run in years. One review specifically saying that if you'd given up on the show, this was the year to come back, alongside, as always, the reliable contingent declaring terminal decline and complaining that the arch nemeses have been reduced to sitcom rivals and that they've ruined Evil Morty. Both of those reviews get written every year, regardless of what's in the episodes, and I've made peace with that. The finale, Field of Dreams, is the one people are still chewing on. Morty ends up stranded in a reality where another version of him died and the grieving family destroys his portal gun to keep him there. So he goes to find that world's Rick, who, it turns out, gave up on trans-dimensional technology years ago, got sober, turned his life around, and remarried. He's the happiest version of the character the show has ever put on screen, and Morty deliberately pushes him back into drinking so that he'll build the portal gun. Harmon talked to Polygon about why it had to be that bleak. Marder's framing is the one that stuck with me, that the finale looks at how much Morty has been corrupted by this relationship over the years, and then has him corrupt Rick in exactly the same way to get what he wants. Full circle. 10 years of a kid being dragged along, and now he's the one doing the dragging. For a show that started as a Back to the Future parody, with a joke about a dipping sauce as its stated series arc, that's a fairly serious place to have arrived. Roiland has been publicly silent since the March 2023 statement. He hasn't posted on Instagram or X in any substantial way since. His Instagram bio still lists Rick and Morty, Solar Opposites, and other unannounced projects. There have been no announced projects. He's 46. There is one live piece of speculation, and I want to be clear that it is speculation, and then not come back to it. Around March of 2026, Paramount's Skydance announced an acquisition of Warner Bros. Discovery, a deal in the region of $110 billion, which puts essentially every property under that roof back on the table, and a corner of the fandom, plus some trade commentary, immediately started wondering out loud whether new ownership might eventually open a path back for him, particularly given reporting about Paramount's appetite for hiring people the industry had shut out. Nothing has been announced, nobody has said anything. It is people speculating on the internet about a corporate merger, which is a thing people do for fun, and I'd hold it very loosely. Some housekeeping while we're tidying up. Seasons 1 through 7 left Netflix in the UK and a number of other markets at the very end of December 2025, which caused a small round of panic. The show remains on HBO Max on Hulu and on Adult Swim in the US, and it isn't going anywhere. It's renewed through season 12. The President Curtis spin-off is on the way. 2 Emmys for Outstanding Animated Program sit on a shelf somewhere. And the thread I keep pulling on, having gone through all of it, almost none of these fights were about the show. There's no banned episode, no lawsuit from anyone famous, no regulator ever wrote to them, no advertiser walked. The only time anything got physically pulled off a screen anywhere was a few trims in a couple of territories that nobody has ever formally explained. Everything that actually went wrong somewhere else. In a Burbank office over pensions, on a subreddit, in a McDonald's queue, in a sealed courtroom in Orange County for 3 years while nobody knew, in a podcast episode where a man spent 7 minutes describing what he'd done to somebody who worked for him. That's not the usual shape of these stories, and it took me a while to work out why it bothered me. I think it's this. With most shows, the scandals are about what got made. With this one, they're almost entirely about what it was like to be near it. 12 days, that's the number I'll probably keep out of everything in this video. 12 days from a court document becoming public to a man having no employer anywhere on Earth, including the 2 companies he built himself. Whatever you think about any of it, that's a genuinely strange thing to have happened to a person, and it happened almost entirely in public, and most people watching had never heard the man's name. There's plenty I didn't get to. The Channel 101 archive is a whole thing on its own, and I'd quite like to go through it properly. The anime deserves more than the 2 minutes it got here. And the broader labour history of Adult Swim, how much of that network was built on non-union animation for years, is probably a better video than this one, if I can work out how to make 45 minutes of collective bargaining pleasant to fall asleep to. For now though, that's every one of them. The source, the subreddit, the walkout, the apology, the court file, the 2 new voices, and a press release joke about back hair. Sleep well,